So this is the new iPad mini for 2021. It's very small. I love the form factor, but this video is coming from the perspective of someone who's never owned any of the mini iPads before. This was the first one that I've ever had in here, and it's really small. So when I first got it in, I pull it out of the box, I'm like, this feels really cool, it's neat, but is it too small? Because when it comes to tablets, for the stuff that I do, small stuff is always cool, right? But there's this point where you start to lose functionality if it's too small. And I was worried that that might be the case with this particular device. But the truth is, this is my favorite tablet size. This is perfect. It's ideal for the stuff that I do. Let's get into it. So when they make a device that's small like this, they have to make some adjustments and kind of tweaks to the form factor. Like when you have the Apple Pencil attached magnetically to the device, there isn't much more room to the left and right because it's such a small machine that they've had to move the volume adjust buttons to the ends of the iPad instead of it being where they used to be. But the overall product is very much just a really small iPad. Now I want to focus on the screen first. This is an 8.3-inch screen. It's a bright IPS panel. It's a good size for content consumption. It is, however, not an OLED display, nor is it lit by mini LEDs. So it's always gonna be a step down compared to like the top end stuff from Apple. It's a nice looking screen, but if you're looking for like the best possible image quality, this won't be able to hit that. It's also only a 60 hertz display. Now, when I first saw the announcement, I was like, man, I wish they made this a 120 hertz display. Having used this for a bit, the reality is for the stuff that I would ever do on a screen this size, there's no reason for this to be a 120 hertz display. It's just not what I would use this for. I'm not playing fast-paced shooters on it, but I do notice that slower refresh rate, like in the UI, the animations, and particularly with the pen work, right? If you have the Apple Pencil 2 and you're using it on the screen for any kind of illustration or coloring or anything to deal with this pen and this screen, that interface, the latency and the lag, the visual lag, is noticeable. It's very slight, but it depends on what you're purchasing this for, right? If you want to pick up an iPad with the main intent of using it as a illustrative tool, I would go for a Pro model because that 120 hertz does make a difference. Like the Pro Motion makes the whole experience smoother and it makes it better. The experience is better. It's not like you're going to be a worse illustrator because you're using 60 hertz, but the experience of it is less enjoyable. Now, there's also some black bars you'll see on the sides of the screen with certain games that just comes from the aspect ratio of this display. One other thing about the bezel. So when I first saw this in the pictures and when I pulled it out of the box, the bezel does feel a little bit thicker than I would have liked it. I mean, obviously they have to keep a good amount of bezel around the device to keep it functional and comfortable to use as a tablet because no bezels makes it a terrible tablet experience, but it could have looked nicer if it was shrunken a little bit and still would have been just as functional. So speakers, they're now stereo, left and right while it's in landscape, which is really nice. They're reasonably loud, but if you're playing games, if you're watching the device with your hands like holding it, your hands kind of cover the speakers a little bit, but it's a good speaker experience. Obviously not as good as the Pros or even the iPad Air. Now, one thing that I thought was kind of neat, because the volume button is mounted on the side now, I was concerned, like, how does the device deal with volume controls when you flip the orientation, right? But it turns out there's a gyroscope in here, so obviously it knows what's up. So when it's in this orientation, if you press the volume up, like the higher button, it goes up. But if you flip it, it's the reverse. The buttons automatically reconfigure so that this up now is volume up. It's kind of neat. So they've thought of that at the very least, because otherwise it would have been confusing. I have actually used a tablet, I forget which company it was, that it didn't do that, and it was very disorienting as to like which was up and down. Okay, let's talk about performance. The A15 Bionic chip is fast, like you'd expect it to be, right? 6-core CPU, 5-core GPU on the iPad mini. It benchmarks well, and if you do any kind of photo or video work, it's going to perform a lot better on this machine than the previous minis. Now, in terms of games, because this doesn't have the 120 hertz Pro Motion panel, you're not going to get the best possible iPad gaming experience, right? You do need to pick a Pro device for that. This only has the 60 hertz Poverty Motion for amateurs. It's still a really good performer though. So in something like Genshin Impact, it plays well, but you get the most consistent performance at 30 frames per second. You can bump it up to 60 and it's smooth sometimes, but you start to drop some frames when you get into some graphically intensive areas. But the other thing is the form factor. Because it's a smaller device, if you're ever playing a game without a controller and just using the screen, it's just a nicer device to hold in your hand than a regular big iPad. Now, in terms of the cameras, the rear camera's been upgraded this year, but now there's a bit of a camera bump. It's not the worst thing in the world, but camera bumps are still camera bumps. But if you do have it in the case that Apple sells, it's flushed with the case. But the front-facing camera, that's the best stuff, man. It's got the ultra wide lens with center stage, and I love it. I'm so glad that Apple implemented it into the iPad mini, because I feel like in some other alternate universe, Apple could have just twisted it and made it so you had to get the Pro models to be able to get that feature. But it's nice. It's a fun kind of family FaceTime feature. Quick note about the battery. So they claim it a 10-hour battery. My testing got 8.5. I don't feel like that's different from any of the other iPads I've used. It's always around 8 hours. There's a USB-C port this year for charging and connectivity, but it doesn't support Thunderbolt. And then the sleep wake button supports Touch ID, which is a fast way to get in and out. It's very quick, like you'd expect. Now, in terms of pricing, this starts at $499 for a 64 gig model, which I think is fair. It's $100 more than the mini from the previous generation, so it's more expensive. Obviously, you're getting a whole bunch more features. I feel like it's fairly priced. I don't love the color selection. The Starlight color here is uninspiring to me. Like, I feel like it's just not a color for me, but they don't have like the more fun, vibrant colors like they often do with iPads. The other thing though is the storage. So they have a 64 gig model at the base and then 256. There's no 128 right down the middle. I feel like that's the one I would go for personally. But if they had a 128, I would go for that, but I'm probably just going for a 64. But I feel like they do that split with intent, right? I feel like most people would actually want 128 instead of a 64. Like, they probably pay for it. But that's the iPad mini. I think it's a good device. If you're eyeing it, if you're looking at it, yeah, I like it. Just make sure that if your purpose of picking this thing up is for drawing, you want to like use it for illustration and coloring, and just you want to use the pencil a lot, I'd go for the Pro models. Like, you're just going to get a better overall experience for that kind of stuff. But otherwise, it's a good one. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thumbs if you liked it, subs if you loved it. See you guys next time.